Some jobs only make sense in daylight. Growing up, I'd been to the Rutherford City Museum on countless field trips, running clumsy through echoing marble halls, pressing my nose to glass, awed by ancient bones and sparkling gemstones. Even as an adult, I remembered it as a gentle, sleepy place, quiet, sunlit, self-contained. On the first night I started as a security guard, that illusion shattered with the closing chime of the front doors. I needed the money. That was the beginning and end of it. A pink slip at my last job. Bills piling up. Rent overdue. I never told my friends what job I took. I told myself, it's just a museum. How bad could it be to walk around expensive old stuff for a few hours before dawn? Cakewalk, I thought, not knowing how wrong I'd turn out to be. Outside, the city still clung to shreds of late evening, traffic sighing away, streetlights blistering in the dusk. Inside, the fluorescent lobby lights flickered, casting long pools of brightness that didn't quite reach the corners, as though even light itself didn't want to stay past closing. The night air pressed uneasy against the thick stone walls. The paperwork was quick. A single page of do's and don'ts, a faded blue uniform shirt, too large for my frame. They told me to wait in the anteroom next to the ticket counter. I sat there awkwardly, the only sound the ticking of some unseen clock and the old building creaking, like it was taking deep, steady breaths. At precisely 10 p.m., Mr. Harris emerged from behind the security office, a man whose presence filled the hall, though he barely came up to my shoulder. His hair, what little he had, was white and neatly combed. His uniform looked older than most exhibits, but in better repair. He nodded once and extended his hand, as if every movement cost him energy. "You're the new one. Stokes, right?" he said. His voice had the gravelly rasp of unfiltered cigarettes and insomnia. "Yes, sir, Sawyer Stokes," I replied, standing too quickly. He didn't bother with pleasantries or any kind of tour. Instead, he held out something battered and small, a laminated card, the plastic edges curling in on themselves, like old leaves. He pressed it into my palm. "Rules for Night Watch," he said, meeting my eyes with a locked, dark stare. "Read it. Do exactly as it says. No matter what. Don't joke about it." His seriousness unsettled me. I looked down at the card. There was the museum's logo, faded, along with 10 simple numbered rules. The first 3 caught my eye. Do not acknowledge the janitor if he cleans the south hallway after midnight. If you hear music from the Egyptian wing after 2 a.m., do not investigate. Never look in the dinosaur exhibit's glass after midnight. Is this a joke? Some kind of hazing for the rookies? I asked, half laughing, holding up the card. Mr. Harris didn't smile. In fact, his expression didn't change at all. "Memorize the list," he said, voice low. "Trust me." Then he turned and walked away, keys jangling, his form swallowed by the shadows stretching from the east gallery. I was left standing in the empty lobby, staring down at an artifact far stranger than anything behind glass. Time moves differently at night in a museum. Hours thicken. The floors, gleaming and polished, seem to stretch forever. Every footstep feels like an intrusion. Every whisper of air from an unseen vent, like breathing. No crowds, no children, no laughter. Nothing but me, my flashlight, the echo of my own uncertain steps, and the rules. I ran a tentative first round, list folded in my pocket, trying to recall the layout. Everything felt both familiar and wrong. The exhibits, a painted canoe, a fossilized tree trunk, a wall of bronze masks, took on a new edge of threat, all lit and twisted by artificial light. I tried telling myself this was all nerves, that museums at night were just bound to be a bit unsettling. But that unease burrowed deeper with every step. The janitor was nowhere to be seen, let alone in the south hallway. I told myself to ignore Rule 1. Still, in the silence, I found myself glancing backward every few minutes, catching glimpses of empty corridors. The shadows stretched much further than during the day, and the air smelled faintly of dust and something older, sharp beneath the stone, like the air in a hospital, only colder. At 1 a.m., I found myself paused outside the Egyptian wing. My mind drifted to Rule 2. If you hear music from the Egyptian wing after 2 a.m., do not investigate. Absently, I listened harder. Nothing. Just the drone of a distant heater and the quiet skittering of pipes. I shook my head, embarrassed at how taut my nerves had become. I texted a friend. No reply. My phone clock crawled past 2 a.m. My rounds grew automatic, each time circling past the museum's centerpiece. The dinosaur hall, the T-Rex skeleton, the crown jewel of Rutherford's collection, loomed over the polished floor, skull gaping, tail stretching menacingly overhead. As a child, I'd stood here mesmerized, but now the exhibit seemed held in a perpetual snarl. I remembered Rule 3, never look in the dinosaur exhibit's glass after midnight. It was 2:24 a.m. The glass case at the foot of the skeleton, reflecting the skeleton and sometimes the mural behind, was too tempting. I laughed nervously at myself, curiosity pricking the back of my mind. What harm could a look do? I inched closer, my footsteps echoing, the silence sharpening until even my breathing seemed too loud. I told myself I wasn't scared. I told myself it was just glass and bones. Looking down, I expected to see the warped reflection of the T-Rex, maybe my own tired face. Instead, the reflection had shifted. I saw myself standing, yes, but my reflection was wrong. The grin stretched too wide, lingering on my face as I moved. My eyes didn't quite match the movement of my own. For a brief, sickening second, it was as though something else was watching from inside the glass, smiling with my mouth, blinking out of sync with me. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. My flashlight clattered to the ground, a metallic thud that echoed over the polished stone. I scrabbled for it, not daring to look again into the glass, forcing myself to look instead at the marble pillars, at the dinosaur's actual bones overhead. For a long time, I didn't move. My hand shook whenever I lifted the flashlight. I thought I heard something, a faint scraping against the glass like claws, or the drag of someone's fingernails. But when I forced myself to look again, the glass only showed my own face, frightened and pale, nothing more. I made the rest of my rounds quickly, counting every step. When I returned to the lobby, dawn was creeping in, the sun throwing pale lines through the east windows. There by the coat check, Mr. Harris waited, watching me with eyes that seemed to know everything. He didn't ask how my night had gone. He didn't need to. I clocked out, swapped my badge for my bag, and hurried into the raucous, ordinary sounds of sunrise, feeling like I'd been ejected from a world where the rules made no sense. That morning, I sat on the bus home, thumb running along the edge of the rules card in my pocket, reading the words over and over. My mind kept slipping back to that grinning, lingering reflection. How unreal, how wrong it seemed. I found myself wondering if it was only exhaustion, a trick of the lighting, or something much worse. But that was just the first night. I didn't know then how much stranger the rules would become, or how closely they seemed to watch me, changing to fit the next night's darkness. And so, with a growing dread, I prepared for my next shift. I told myself I'd be ready. But as I'd soon find out, the list of rules was only getting longer. I got off the bus for my second night at Rutherford City Museum with less spring in my step. My shift started at 10, but I showed up at 9:30, wandering the silent city streets outside, counting my nervous breaths. I held the rule card in my hand like a talisman, my thumb tracing the plastic edge as if the rules themselves could anchor me in reality. Each line felt heavier now, a kind of contract I'd only just begun to understand. Inside the museum was a beast at rest. Gone were the day's tourists and chattering children. Instead, the place seemed to inhale, corridors yawning wider, displays unsettling in their stillness. Even the faint glow of city light bleeding through the stained glass couldn't dispel the feeling that the museum at night was occupied, not just by history and artifacts, but by something else, something watchful. Mr. Harris sat behind the main desk, scribbling notes in an old spiral ledger. Eyes flicking up, he grunted a low greeting as I signed in. "Did you read the list?" I nodded, voice catching on a lie. "Yeah, I took it seriously," I said, then hesitated. "About the dinosaur glass. I think I saw something weird in my reflection." He watched me for a heartbeat too long and then, wordlessly, slid an envelope across the desk. "You'll need to update your list," he said. "It changes, sometimes overnight. Don't throw the old one away." Inside, I found a fresh, neatly typed card, but there were new lines, additions at the end in blocky red font. The air went cold along my spine as I read. "If you find a red feather in the storage room, leave it where it is. Do not touch it, no matter how much it bothers you. If a stone falls from the gem exhibit after 1:15 a.m., place it back inside the case before 1:30 a.m. Use gloves. If a stray dog appears during your rounds, offer it your sandwich, if you have one. Do not touch its fur." "I didn't see anything about a dog last night," I said, eyes wide. Mr. Harris just shrugged. "Eat a hearty meal before your shift. Rules change to suit the times. The guards, the issues, do as they say, even the ones that sound nuts." He said it like a man discussing weather. Inevitable. Impersonal. He didn't wait for more questions, only gathered his coat and left me with my bewilderment. I started my rounds, boots echoing on marble, heart thudding with every step. The rules card, heavier now, felt like a map to territory I didn't want to visit. I moved through rooms with a choreographed caution, scanning for spilled stones, red feathers, stray animals. I didn't know what scared me more, that nothing would happen, or that something definitely would. The Egyptian wing, my next stop, was silent as a tomb. I remembered the rule from yesterday. If I heard music after 2 a.m., don't investigate. I held my breath as I passed, ears straining for any trace of a melody. Instead, the quiet pressed in, weighted and thick. I hurried by, not looking back, the stone sarcophagi offering no comfort. I detoured past the storage room. Its door, sturdy and unremarkable, showed nothing amiss. But inside, on a battered wooden shelf, I saw it. A single vivid red feather, out of place among the dust and packing foam. I stood, transfixed, recalling the new rule. Part of me itched to pick it up, to see if it was real, but my fingers froze before the glass. Instead, I closed the door and walked on, acutely aware of some presence watching from within that shadowed space. Maybe it's a test, I thought, or someone's elaborate prank. The explanation did nothing to ease the knots in my gut. Things didn't begin to feel truly uncanny until just past 1 a.m. The gemstone gallery, sparkling with amethyst and quartz, was one of my favorite exhibits as a child. Now I moved through it with deliberate caution. The hush in that room was so complete my own heartbeat seemed amplified, almost disrespectful. As I passed, something pinged, a soft, sharp click. I crouched down and saw a small, pale green stone on the floor, rolling in a slow circle. Rule 5 surfaced in my mind. If a stone falls after 1:15 a.m., I checked my watch, 1:17 a.m. With trembling hands, I fetched the gloves from my belt pouch, the latex crinkling. I slipped the stone back among its cousins inside the case, pausing to check if anything else was amiss. The moment the stone touched its velvet cushion, the feeling of pressure in my ears eased. as if something had been straining to emerge but now, for the moment, was appeased. I catalogued these moments, made mental notes, counted them like prayers. Familiar halls that I'd once wandered without consequence were now marked with invisible dangers, mines hidden by routine. At 2:10 a.m., I rounded the north staircase and froze. There, at the far end of the tiled floor, a dog sat in a patch of moonlight from the skylight above. Its fur, black and glossy, was almost blue in the artificial dusk. It watched me, head cocked and intelligent eyes gleaming, as if it expected me to speak first. I fumbled for my lunch bag, producing the ham sandwich I hadn't touched. "Offer it your sandwich," the card had said. "Do not touch its fur." Heart pounding, I gingerly unwrapped the sandwich and set it on the floor, edged toward the dog. The dog stood, slow and measured, then patted over. It sniffed the sandwich delicately, gave me one last meaningful look, and then ate, with dignified hunger, every bite slow and precise. As it finished, the dog sat, surveyed me, then patted away, vanishing between the displays as if it had always belonged. I found myself shaking with relief for no clear reason. Just a dog, I told myself. But the sense of ritual, the specificity of the rule, made it feel as if the act had been a necessary exchange, a transaction with something I couldn't see. On my way back, I crossed paths with another guard, Johnson, a young man with haunted eyes and a week-old beard. He offered only a terse nod, glancing at the rules card in my hand. "Did you see the dog?" I whispered, unsure if I should mention it. He swallowed. "Sometimes it's a cat, sometimes it's a girl with a red ribbon. Don't break the rules," he said, voice flat. "Just don't." The museum's emptiness pressed in again. The rules weren't just procedural. They were protection, handed down like old spells. I began to realize every odd event had its slot in the card. Every warning was born of something that had once gone wrong. Hours crawled by. As dawn approached, I found myself tempted to check on the storage room's feather to see if it was still there. I resisted. Instead, I finished my rounds, returned to the AV closet, and counted out the minutes until my shift ended, sleepless and alert. When morning sunlight split the east corridor, I signed out and handed my log to Mr. Harris, who simply nodded. "Keep your list with you," was all he said. I walked out into the hum of the waking city, feeling the day press in, hollowed by the secrets I now incubated. The list had grown stranger. The strangeness lingered in my bones, and I knew. The museum was full of stories and warnings. Tonight I had followed the rules. Tomorrow, there might be new ones. But after that second night, I began to wonder, how many rules were there really, and who or what had written the very first one? It was on my third night at Rutherford City Museum that I noticed the door. Or rather, I noticed how carefully I hadn't. It sat flush in the wall beside the mineral vault, painted a shade of grimy cream, marked only with a small tarnished brass lion's head for a handle. I'd passed that spot at least a dozen times, but somehow my eyes had skimmed over it, the way they sometimes do a crack in the sidewalk or a blemish in a painting. That strange, almost deliberate oversight made me uneasy in retrospect. I'd spent the start of the shift reading and rereading the rules. The list had grown again. 2 new entries, both alarming in their specificity. Never let anyone out of the door marked with the brass lion, no matter who they say they are. If you hear pleading from inside, do not reply. Do not approach closer than 6 steps. Nobody had told me about a locked room or what might require warning against letting someone or something out. When I'd brought it up with Mr. Harris at sign-in, his face went pale and shut like a book snapped closed. "Just keep to the rules," was all he'd say, knuckles whitening as he gripped the logbook. His voice was gentler than usual, but far away. The fabric of my nightly routine began to unravel. Every corridor felt charged. Every old painting, somehow more watchful. I walked my rounds, hand never far from my flashlight, new rules burning holes in my pocket alongside the card. It might have been uneventful, just another slow, strange circuit, if not for the echoing tap, tap, tap that called me to the mineral vault at precisely 2:48 a.m. At first, I thought it was the pipes again, that endless background orchestra in an old building. But it was too deliberate. 3 knocks, perfectly spaced, the kind that demanded to be heard. My mind raced through the new rules. The lion's head door was just around the corner, 6 steps away, I reminded myself, forcing my boots to count each echo. 1, 2, 3. I stopped before the 4th, pressed flat against the cool marble, straining for a sound. For a moment, just silence. I counted my breaths. 4, 5, 6. A shuffling noise, a kind of urgency, like someone's shoes dragging along old tile. Then suddenly, a voice, reedy and breathless, muffled through thick wood. Hello? Something inside me recoiled at the sound. It was a perfect imitation of my own voice. The exact cadence, the exact trace of anxiety. Hearing it stills my blood. Is someone there? Please, I'm trapped. Let me out, please. They say there's a kind of terror that doesn't make you scream or run, only freezes you, locks you up tight. My hands gripped the flashlight until my knuckles hurt. All I wanted was to run, but the museum behind me felt infinite, full of listening, silent witnesses. I wanted to reply. Who are you? Was at the tip of my tongue, but the rule echoed. Do not reply. Do not approach closer than 6 steps. The imitation of my voice grew frantic. Please, Sawyer. You have to help. I don't know how I got in here. I can't breathe, please. There's a memory, hot and immediate. Being a child lost in a department store, calling for my mother, desperate and certain she must hear me and respond. But this wasn't a child, and it certainly wasn't me. The handle, the lion's brass mane, began to rattle, as if pressed from the inside by frantic hands. I could see the tarnished snout moving in the half-light, a reflection twitching just beneath the metal. A chill crawled up my spine. The voice changed, just slightly, a note of cloying sweetness. I know you're out there, Sawyer. I can hear your breathing. Just let me out and I'll show you how to leave. My mind flashed with broken images. The shifting, wrong reflection in the dinosaur glass, the uncanny intelligence in the dog's eyes, the way the museum seemed to notice my presence. And now this. Something locked behind a door, knowing my name, wrapped in my own voice. I stared at the lion head. A kind of gravity pulled at me, the ancient animal's eyes dull and deep, as if peering into a well. I remembered the rule, of all of them, never this one. I forced myself to back away, step by slow step. The hallway's air pulsed heavier with each pace. My name came again, slurred now, splitting into dozens of hushed, layered voices. Sawyer, Sawyer, Sawyer. The pleading stopped. For a moment, only my heart drummed in my head, sweat tracing a cold line down my neck. And then came the anger. A guttural noise, low and inhuman, vibrated through the door. Fists pounded furiously. The lion's face seemed to snarl, eyes narrowing. Or perhaps it was just a trick of the shadow, flashing from my shaking flashlight. Coward, the voice bellowed, rising into a warbling, guttural shriek. Let me out. I need your face. Let me out. I ran, boots squelching on marble, fleeing that threshold and everything it promised. Not until I rounded the corner twice did the echoing fade, the worst of it muffled by thick stone and panicked breath. I hid in a supply closet for what might have been minutes or an hour, hands trembling so hard I could barely steady my flashlight. My breaths came in shallow bursts, mind clawing for any rational explanation. Trick of the plumbing, maybe, just a waking dream. But I knew, with bone-deep certainty, that something in the museum wanted out. and it knew me. I sat in the dim closet, replaying the words, "I need your face." The world outside continued its night shift hush, but something in the museum had sharpened. When I finally crept back out to finish my rounds, I found every corridor newly ominous. The shadows seemed thicker, the rules heavier. I counted steps between every door, eyes flicking to every brass handle, every reflection. As morning broke over the stone floors, I staggered into the lobby, dazed, haunted by the echo of that pleading voice and the primal certainty that some things were better left locked away. Mr. Harris watched me with knowing pity as I signed out. He didn't ask what happened. The answer now would have been too costly. That day, as I tried and failed to sleep, haunted by the echo of my own name echoing in the dark, I realized the rules weren't just warnings, they were lifelines, and the museum was testing me, pushing inch by inch against their limits. But I'd survived 3 nights and followed every rule. The next night, though, I'd see just how many of the museum's secrets could slip through the cracks, and what happened when curiosity outpaced caution. The third night had left me rattled, drained. The locked door incident haunted every moment until I fell into a restless, broken sleep. I'd never felt so watched, so fragile, caught in a web woven by rules I barely understood. Still, the museum needed watching. The city didn't care, and my bills didn't pause. So I showed up again, pushing down the dread that gripped me. I kept the rule card folded carefully in my pocket, now thick with notes and added warnings. The lion's door had become a mental scar. I checked it often, though I told myself it was just habit, not fear. The old building welcomed me like an old wound, cold, familiar, and aching beneath the surface. That night's new rule appeared with my logbook at sign-in, scribbled on a fresh slip of paper, almost like a footnote. If you see anyone visiting the art gallery between 3 o'clock, 3:17 a.m., do not let them see you. Do not engage. Do not look directly into their eyes. I stared at it in the flickering fluorescent light. Who would be wandering around the gallery at 3 in the morning? No public tours, no cleaning crews that late. The thought set a chill through my spine. A little after 2 a.m., I began the slow mechanical circuit through the museum's galleries. The halls still whispered to me, the displays like silent sentinels, unmoved but watching. I found myself looking over my shoulder more than usual. The sense of unseen eyes multiplied since the locked door incident, sharp, patient, waiting. At 2:55 a.m., I came to the art gallery. It was an imposing, hushed space, filled with portraits and landscapes spanning generations. The paintings caught the muted glow of the emergency lights, sat armored behind glass frames that distorted reflections if you looked too long. I paused at the doorway, breathing slowly and steadying my nerves. Shadows pooled in the corners, and the polished wooden floor cast ghostly reflections, too indistinct to read clearly. Then, just before 3 a.m., I noticed a figure standing near the far wall. Not the lone museum guard I expected, nor a janitor. This figure was too still, too silent. I froze, heart hammering. The silhouette was slender, maybe a woman, clad in a dark, flowing coat that shimmered faintly in the low light. My first instinct was to call out to confirm I wasn't losing my mind, but the new rule echoed, "Do not engage. Do not let them see you." I slid behind a large marble column, breathing shallow, prayer-thin beads of sweat slipping down my neck. From my vantage point, barely daring a glance, I watched. The figure's head tilted slightly, as if studying one painting in particular, a large portrait of a woman with cold, distant eyes and a faint smile that looked like it was carved into her skin. What unsettled me wasn't the figure itself, but their face, or rather, the absence of it. When I dared a slow peek, the person's face was wrong, not simply shadowed or blurred, but shifting, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a marble. It rippled and folded, parts of it collapsing and reforming in silent flashes. Eyes drifted out of focus, and the lips curved into shapes that weren't human smiles. A flicker of sharp teeth, a movement of flesh that suggested something else beneath the skin. My breath caught, and I pressed myself deeper behind the column. The stranger moved closer to the painting, head slowly leaning in, their face bending and folding, a strange kaleidoscope of features. Then the strangest thing happened. They reached out a hand, not to touch the painting, but to grasp thin air beside it, fingers curling as though pressing on an invisible pane. And suddenly, their body vanished. Not a blink or a blink, and you miss it disappearance. The figure simply stepped through the invisible wall, where moments ago there had been a ghostly visitor, now stood. Nothing but cold hall air and the faintest ripple in the gallery's stillness. My pulse was pounding in my ears, legs barely holding me upright. The gallery felt too empty, too vast. Taking fright from that breathless moment, I crouched farther into shadow and moved cautiously away. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, but the evidence was unarguable. I edged back to the portrait the figure had been watching. The glass behind which it hung wasn't ordinary. The faintest distortions shimmered beneath its surface, and then I saw it, a subtle change, as if the painting's subject was not entirely the same woman depicted the day before. Her eyes held a new darkness, deeper and more knowing. Her smile twisted faintly, as if pleased at some cruel joke, but no one else was in the gallery. No sound but the soft hum of the emergency light, the quiet thump of my own heartbeat. I stepped back slowly, blinking hard. Could the paintings themselves change, shift with the presence of those who walk the galleries after hours? I didn't want to find out. Later, back in the security office, I turned the incident over in my mind, eyes flicking again to the list of rules. I didn't want to believe the warnings were real, but what else could explain it? The locked door, the dog, the reflections didn't match reality. Most of all, I didn't want to become one of the stories the senior guard warned me about, the stories of guards who vanished with only whispered legends left behind. I kept the new rule pinned and memorized as best I could. Between 3 o'clock and 3:17 a.m., stay unseen, stay out of sight, stay silent. Because some guests are meant to come only after hours, only in shadows. And sometimes the things you see are not just figments of your imagination. There's something worse. When my shift finally ended and I stepped out into the crisp dawn, the museum behind me felt like a living thing, with secrets too heavy to carry alone. In the pale morning light, I folded the new card carefully and slid it into my coat pocket. I didn't want to ask what the next rule would be, but I already knew. With every night I spent inside, the museum's strange, terrible rules were growing. And so was whatever lurked within. The night was colder than usual when I arrived at the Rutherford City Museum for my 5th shift, the kind of cold that seeps deep into your bones and doesn't quite leave. The building's ancient stone walls seemed to absorb every sound, or maybe in the dead of night, the silence inside was just too loud. I tried to settle into the routine, clutching the ever-growing list of rules like a lifeline. I felt the weight of that plastic card in my pocket, now thick with scribbles and notes from previous nights, proof that the museum's strange demands were real and growing. The clock ticked closer to 3 a.m. with a creeping sense of unease. I had finished my usual rounds, the floors shining cold beneath the emergency lights that flickered nervously in the distance. Tonight, something felt different, like the museum was holding its breath. The usual hum of ventilation and distant dripping pipes had stilled, replaced by a pressing silence that unsettled me. And then, at precisely 3:15 a.m., it happened. The main lights died all at once. The darkness came like a physical force, swallowing the corridors and galleries whole. Emergency lights started flickering, casting the building in sharp red and green hues, painting long, jittery shadows that danced with every blink. My breath caught, heart pounding rhythmically. The museum was plunged into this unnatural blackout, and I was alone with it. I reached for my flashlight, grip tightening around the cool metal, ready to light it up. Then a sudden thought stopped me. The rule. It was written simply, but with care. During outages, wait exactly 9 minutes before lighting your flashlight. Why? I had no idea. But something in me obeyed, all too aware that the difference between survival and catastrophe was measured in seconds. I sat down against the nearest wall, back pressed to cold stone, counting seconds under my breath. 1, 2, 3, 9. A long pause, and then I flicked on the flashlight's beam. The light cut through the darkness, illuminating walls, tile floors, the edges of paintings, but it also revealed something else. Shadows. Not just the kind cast by my light, but shadows moving independently, curving and twisting against the edges of the emergency light's glow. They skirted around corners, writhing against pillars, some stretching impossibly long and thin, others pooling like liquid beneath display cases. They weren't human, at least not fully. Their shapes shifted too fast to hold form. At one moment they resembled people silently watching, the next barely human at all, stretched limbs, twisted faces, eyes too wide or absent altogether. The air grew heavy, thickening as if the darkness itself was pressing on my skin. And then, the strangest thing, I looked down at my wristwatch. The second hand was moving backwards. My heart skipped a beat. I tried to tell myself it was a malfunction, but the weight of the surroundings crushed reason. Time was going backward. For the rest of the blackout, which felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than 15 minutes, I sat frozen, trying not to move or breathe too loudly. The whisper of distant things, some deep rasping, a soft drag across the floor, kept tempo with the shadows' movements, like things that had slipped from the world and were waiting. When the main lights finally sputtered back on, flooding the halls with their harsh, buzzing glow, everything snapped back to normal. The shadows vanished, the oppressive weight released. My watch ticked forward again with perfect precision. I was left sitting in the middle of the gallery, trembling, like I'd wandered through a waking nightmare. The emergency lights switched off less than a minute later, and the steady hum of the ventilation returned. But I was different. Something inside me had been pried loose. I finished the rest of my rounds as fast as I dared, eyes darting to every corner, every crack where shadows might have lingered. Back at the security desk, I found a folded slip of paper left on my logbook. In shaky handwriting it said, Rule 10. When the lights fail, count 9 minutes. Obey the wait. Do not rush salvation. No explanation, but I felt like I understood. The museum had rules not just to keep me safe from the strange things I'd already encountered, but to protect me from the darkness itself. Mr. Harris arrived just before dawn, his face unshaven and pale. He didn't say much beyond a tired, "You'll get used to it," or "It will get you." Something in his voice told me he wasn't kidding. As the sunrise spilled through the tall windows, I looked back over the empty halls one last time before clocking out. The museum felt alive in a way I couldn't explain, a creature breathing in shadows and rules, full of mysteries beyond my understanding. I held the rule card tight, knowing the nights ahead would only get worse. Because for all its silence and stone, Rutherford City Museum had an endless hunger for watchers, for listeners, for those willing to obey its strange and terrible rules. And the next rule was waiting for me. The nights were getting harder, the rules had multiplied, the shadows grew thicker, and the museum seemed less like a building and more a living entity. breathing, watching, waiting. After the blackout, I thought I'd seen the worst. I was wrong. That morning, I called in sick. I needed rest to escape the ever-growing weight in my chest, but by the time night rolled around again, the pull of the museum was too strong to resist. The haze of fatigue barely lifted as I slipped back under its cold stone arches. This time, something felt different from the moment I stepped in. Mr. Harris met me at the main desk, but there was a flicker of something behind his gray eyes I hadn't noticed before, a strange mixture of weariness and warning. No longer the stoic man of few words, he motioned for me to follow him into the small security office, a cramped space filled with monitors and dusty ledgers that tracked shifts, incidents, and things I wasn't meant to see. He closed the door behind us and pulled out a chair, gesturing for me to sit. "I've been watching you, Sawyer," he said quietly, voice rough and low. "You're doing well, better than some." He paused, fingers drumming on the desk. "But you need to know what this place really is, and why the rules exist." I swallowed, heart hammering, waiting. Mr. Harris's gaze dropped to the floor for a moment before he met my eyes again. "This museum, it's not just a museum. It's a gate, a boundary between worlds, between what's here and what's not." I laughed nervously, but he ignored it. "Over the decades, guards have come and gone. Few stay long." He leaned forward. "Some disappeared, without a trace. Others went insane, trapped in their own minds, lost to things no one else can see." His words fell like stones in my gut. "Why the rules?" I asked. "Are they really protection or something else?" He nodded. "Protection, yes, but also keeping what's inside. The rules are old and written by those who survived. They keep the balance. Break a rule, and you risk tearing that balance and yourself apart." I thought of the locked door, the voice that had mimicked my name, begging to be freed. "Some guards hear the voices," he said. "Some see shadows, guests that shouldn't be here. The dog, the music, the shifting faces in paintings, all reminders. Reminders to keep your distance." His hand trembled as he slid something across the desk. It was a worn photograph, yellowed with age. 4 men in old security uniforms stood before the museum's front steps, faces grim and tired. Mr. Harris pointed to one figure. "That's Nathaniel Crane. He was the first night guard to break a rule. We haven't seen him since." I studied the photograph, then looked up. "Are you saying people get taken?" My voice caught in my throat. "Taken? Maybe claimed is more accurate," Harris said. "By what? I can't explain. But once it starts, it's like a chain reaction." I shivered, gripping the edges of the desk. "And there's something else," he whispered, lowering his voice. "The final rule." I knew the list had grown steadily each night, but I shook my head. "I haven't seen it." "It appears late," he said. "The warning before the last act. When you hear your own name whispered in the storage basement, do not answer. Ever." A cold sweat broke out over me. "The basement?" I echoed. "Why?" "Because the basement is where the museum's heart beats," Mr. Harris said. "It's where the boundary is thinnest, where things seep through." He looked me in the eye. "If you answer, if you respond, you won't leave. You'll be pulled under, trapped here with us, forever." I wanted to laugh it off again, but I couldn't. The seriousness in his eyes, the years of exhaustion etched into his face, told a different story, one I couldn't ignore. "And you?" he said quietly, voice cracking. "I can't leave. Not anymore. Something here holds me." I realized then he wasn't just an old man doing his job. He was a warning in human form. The museum creaked, as if it had heard every word. A distant scraping echoed faintly behind the walls. I stood slowly, the photograph cold in my palm. "There's a lot you don't understand yet," Mr. Harris said. "But you will. And if the museum calls you deeper, don't go. Stay safe by keeping your eyes open and your mouth shut." I nodded, though a chill had settled deep inside. That night, I went on my rounds with fresh urgency. The weight of that final rule hung over me, a shadow darker than any I'd seen. The basement felt like a place I wanted to avoid entirely, a tomb beneath the city, filled with whispered dangers. Mr. Harris's warning replayed in my mind with every step, every door I passed. When your own name is whispered in the dark, he'd said, don't answer. But what if the thing whispering wasn't human? What if it was the museum itself? As the night deepened, I found myself glancing toward the basement door more times than was safe. And I didn't know if I could ignore it. By the time I reached my 7th night at the Rutherford City Museum, fatigue had settled into my bones like a slow poison. The rules weighed heavier with every passing shift, an unrelenting chain tightening around my throat. I memorized each one, repeated them like a mantra in dark hours. But exhaustion dulls warnings, and desperation gnaws at judgment. I should have known better. The newest rule appeared slipped beneath my logbook at sign-in. 11. Never respond to a tap, knock, or sound at the mirror exhibits between 4:40 a.m. and 4:50 a.m. Simple enough. But the thing was, the museum was full of mirrors and glass cases. How was I supposed to know which mirror exhibits they meant, and what was so important about 10 minutes? I tried to dismiss it. Rules piled upon rules. The locked door, the red feather, the dog, the voices. How was I supposed to survive nights filled with riddles? Still, I counted the minutes as the clock crawled toward her 4:40 a.m. Mind-fraying, I circled the exhibits near the east wing, where the museum's old mirror collection was showcased. Heavy gilded frames and antique glass, dusty but intact. At precisely 4:44 a.m., a sharp tap echoed through the hall. I froze. The sound was soft, a hard, deliberate knock against wood or glass, somewhere close, somewhere cold and empty. My heart hammered in my chest, a wild, frantic rhythm. That voice in the back of my mind screamed, "Don't respond, don't move." But my body betrayed me. The ache of solitude mixed with exhaustion, with the lure of curiosity, with a rising panic. I stepped forward, flashlight trembling, and I called out, "Hello? Who's there?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, the tapping resumed. Tap, tap, tap. Closer, sharper. Against every rule drilled into my skull, I reached out and rapped back once on the nearest mirror's edge. The air in the hall thickened, and something shifted. Suddenly, reflections shifted wrong. The mirror didn't show me, or the hall exactly. Instead, I saw a dozen versions of myself, all framed like distorted reflections in fractured glass. Some smiled, some stared blankly, some twisted into expressions of terror I hadn't felt, or maybe had, and buried deep. Then the worst. One image looked straight at me and mouthed my name, my own voice, soundless, echoing in that silent space. I tried to take a step back, but my feet refused. It was like stepping into quicksand, feet stuck in some invisible muck. Whispers erupted around me, a forest of unvoiced words tangled and coiled, hissing just beneath hearing. I spun around to leave, only to see the mirror reflection lagging behind by a heartbeat, a cruel mocking delay that made my skin crawl. Shadows shifted within the glass. Shapes grew murky. The reflection behind me twisted, stretching thin, leaning closer with a smile, far too wide, far too sharp. "I see you," it said. My voice, but colder, like a knife's edge. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for my flashlight, but the beam fragmented, light splitting into fractured shards that didn't reach the darkness behind the glass. Then, disjointed time unraveled around me. Flashbacks flared. Moments from previous nights replayed out of order. Conversations with Mr. Harris, the locked door's voice, the dog's calm stare. I was trapped inside my own memories, fragments bleeding one into another, untethered. The hall stretched impossibly long, then compressed tight. My heart felt as if it would burst. I clenched my fists, desperate for anything solid. Then, with the force of sheer will, I threw my gaze down at the rules card in my pocket. No response to the mirror exhibits between 4:40 and 4:50 a.m. I heard myself whisper it aloud. Fighting the flood, I stepped back from the mirror. The reflections shimmered violently, faces twisting, screaming, but I didn't look away. The shadows recoiled, shrank back into the glass with a wet sloshing sound. The hall snapped back to normal, the distant hum of the night returning like a lifeline. My legs gave way, and I collapsed against the wall, breath ragged, sweat cold on my skin. I was shaking all over, terrified beyond reason. For a long time, I sat there, forehead pressed to stone. I didn't want to pick up the flashlight. After what felt like hours, I pulled the card from my pocket. A new slip of paper fluttered from the folds, a fresh edition in jagged black handwriting. Breaking a rule weakens the boundary. Retrace your steps correctly. Fear the fractures. I didn't understand what that meant exactly, but it was a warning I intended to honor. When Mr. Harris arrived for morning shift change, his eyes held a grave knowing. "You pushed too far," he said. "Did you see?" "I always see," he replied. "But sometimes, it's what you don't see that matters. The rules aren't just rules. They're seals, locks holding something back. And when broken, everything leaks." I nodded, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. That night had shown me just how fragile the divide was, how thin the barrier between what I knew and what lurked just beyond. And as much as I wanted to believe I could ignore the rules, obey them, and survive, I knew the creeping dread would never leave. Not now. Because I'd already caught a glimpse of the fractures. And the museum was watching me, waiting to see what I'd do next. Nights at the Rutherford City Museum had hollowed me out. The rules, they were no longer instructions but chains, binding me tighter with each passing dark hour. I had learned that curiosity could kill, or worse, trap you forever. The last warning weighed heavier than all before it. If you want to leave, never look back as you walk out. Never. The note had appeared that morning, slipped beneath my logbook, handwritten in jagged, fading ink. No one spoke of it. No one offered comfort or explanation. It was the final line drawn in the sand. I wasn't sure I wanted to believe I could leave it all, yet the hope lingered. That night, I prepared myself. I wanted out. I arrived early, folding the growing list of strange and terrible rules into my pocket like a shield. The museum's stone walls seemed to lean in close, urging me to stay, promising safety in submission and danger in escape. All the shadows of past nights pressed close. The dog, with its measured hunger. The locked door's voice calling my name. The shifting faces in paintings, the intangible guests who wandered unseen. I took steady breaths, trying to chew down the knot of dread in my stomach. For the last time, I did my rounds, the museum's silence, swallowing each step like a heavy weight. I didn't linger. I didn't look into any glass cases or mirrors longer than necessary. At last, the moment arrived. The front doors, heavy and cold, stood in front of me like a doorway out of a nightmare. My hands trembled, but didn't falter. I gripped the handles. They were colder than winter steel. I pulled the doors open and stepped out into the night air. The street was empty, the city's hum distant behind me. I walked steadily forward, each footfall echoing against the cracked pavement. But then it began. Whispers, barely audible, carried on the cold wind. My name, Sawyer. 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 They slithered in the air behind me, a chorus of silk and menace. I could feel phantom footsteps pacing my back. Phantom hands brushing the air, reaching, itching, My throat tightened. The calmest voice among them was the locked door's, patient and coaxing. "Look back, Sawyer. You can't leave like this. Not without me." I fought the urge, muscles straining to keep my gaze locked forward. My heart hammered like it would burst. The whispers rose in anger and pleas, a maddening symphony. Then, just as I thought my will might shatter, I heard the first faint chirp of a bird, dawn breaking somewhere. I drew in a shuddering breath. Step after step, I moved faster, but still didn't look back, until I was past the streetlights, past the shadows that clung to the door's threshold. I didn't look. I couldn't. When I finally dared to glance over my shoulder, and I only dared once, just briefly, it was empty. The museum stood behind me, silent, still, watching. Somehow, I was free, but the price of that freedom was etched into my mind. The museum's rules were not just warnings, they were contracts. And whoever breaks the final one walks the thin edge of something that never truly lets you go. I don't know if I'll ever stop hearing my name whispered through the night. Sometimes, long after the darkness falls, I feel the museum calling, waiting, watching. And maybe in some way, it always will.